Jovan Buha! Buha!
Yo, yo. I'm Jovan Buha, Lakers reporter for Buha's Block. And happy Friday, everybody. Happy Labor Day weekend. Happy fantasy football weekend for those who are drafting. I am drafting today and Monday. I actually have a draft at 5 p.m. So I'll be getting my draft slot at 4 p.m. So I have a hard out at around an hour or so. But shout out to the late night gang. Shout out to everybody in the chat. King Bam, Purple Gold for Life, Paul Pernillo, Mark, Alexander White. Shout out to you all and hope you all have a great weekend. So Gonzo, Paul Pernillo, Paul, let's get right into it here with the Q&A. Paul asks, can we trade Gabe Vincent and Maxi Kleber? Yes, the Lakers can, but as I have been saying for the past few weeks, month or so, it's seemingly looking like the Lakers are going to go into the season with the current roster, and they're going to wait closer to the trade deadline, or at least until the December 15th range when certain free agents are eligible and there's a better sense of where teams are at in the standings. And just some teams will enter the season as playoff hopefuls, and then by early to mid-December, they'll be likely lottery bound teams that then might pivot. And I think of a team like a New Orleans could be a team that enters the season maybe with some playoff aspirations, and then within the first couple of months we see that they're most likely going to be I think a bottom 3 team in the West, and maybe a bottom 7 or 8 team in the league. So certainly I think can here is the key part of this question. Can they? Yes. Will they? I think that's TBD. And I think if it happens, it would likely be in the regular season. Now, I think that the biggest issue for the Lakers right now in terms of potentially trading one or both of these guys is both guys, depending on who you talk to, depending on who you survey, have somewhere between slightly negative to just negative value. I would not consider either one of these guys neutral to positive value players in terms of their contract, even with them being on an expiring. Now that does shift a little bit the closer you get to the trade deadline, but a team really at this point, now that we've kind of had teams make trades, sign players, like most rosters are close to set with the exception of obviously the restricted free agent player, guys out there, and how those situations could end up playing out and potentially affecting certain teams. Like for the most part, most teams already have their 14-man roster, 15-man roster, so be it. And no team is trading for Gabe Vincent or Maxi Kleber to add to their rotation. That's just not the caliber of player those guys are considered right now. So I think it would have to be some type of trade where you're getting off of money that you don't want. The issue is the Lakers don't want to be taking on long-term money unless it's a player of a certain caliber. And I think it's with the limited draft capital that they have, unless they're putting in a first-round pick, it's unlikely that they find that sweet spot of a trade of a player who is making a similar amount of money to a Gabe or a Maxi, or even both of them combined, who's much, much better than them, that has multiple years left, and that team is willing to get off of, and that the Lakers are willing to take that guy on. You're just, the Venn diagram there is pretty small in terms of players that check all those boxes, where a team doesn't want them, the Lakers want them, but the team is willing to take on Gabe and Maxi. So I think this is where the Lakers' lack of second round picks really hurts. I think if they had 2 or 3 second round picks to trade, they only have 1 for the record. If they had a couple to trade, or maybe 3, you could maybe trade dump one of these guys into a different situation and there'd be a little bit more flexibility. But because it's either give up a swap, a second, or a first, the Lakers are not going to attach a swap. It doesn't really make sense. They're not going to attach a first, and it's just a second or bust. And that's just not enough for people right now. So I think that was, I tried to break it down in as comprehensive of a way as I could, but essentially I think if these guys get moved, it's likely going to be some point in that December to February range. First super chat from Kevin. Thank you for the super chat. Should trade for Wendell Carter, lower opposing field goal percentage in the paint more than Rudy statistically, one of the most switchable fives in the NBA. Him and Ayton can play together, and he's a very good pick and roll partner. I like Wendell Carter. I think the two big issues with trading for Wendell Carter are, one, what is the incentive for Orlando to trade him? He's their best center, and they do have some center depth, and they can go smaller. And I think potentially their best lineup is a closing lineup with Paolo at the 5. And that could be like when we get to first round, second round, maybe even conference finals, depending on how far they go in the playoffs. There could be situations in which they close small with like Franz and Paolo, or maybe even a Jonathan Isaac in there. Like it just depends on the matchup and what they're trying to do defensively. But I think like Orlando to me is the third best team in the East. I think it's hard to put them much lower than that. Like maybe if you really want to argue fourth best team in the East, but I think third seems to be their floor, at least if we assume everyone's healthy. So I just don't see why a top 3 team in the East would give up their starting center. The other issue with Wendell Carter is he does have an extensive injury history, and I don't like putting the injury prone label on guys, but I think he's close to checking that box of being like semi-injury prone. So if you are trading for him, that is like, I don't really know what the trade is. Like, I don't think Rui would be enough. I think Austin is too much. So the Lakers are kind of in a weird spot where I don't know that there's a clear trade between them and Orlando to get Wendell. And I'm not even talking salaries at this point. I'm purely talking like player value. Like the Lakers would not trade Austin for Wendell, and even if they would entertain Rui, I don't really see, like, Rui kind of clashes with Paolo and Franz. It's another situation where he plays the same positions as their two best players defensively, and I think Rui could be a good fit in Orlando. It's just for what they'd be giving up, I don't think it really makes sense for them. So I think Wendell, I like your proposal, and I like it in theory, and I actually think he could play next to Ayton, and there is a way that it can work. I do view it mostly as like you would stagger those two, and then there would be shifts where they would play together. I don't even know if Wendell would start necessarily, especially if you are giving up, say, Rui. I think you probably bring him off the bench, but I do like Wendell. I just think I don't see why Orlando trades him. I don't see a clear fit in terms of like actual trade pieces and what that trade would look like. And then I also think there's a injury concern. Gonzo asks, is Austin off the bench a real option considering contract status now and upcoming? I do not think so. And again, like I say this every show, right? Like Austin is always this polarizing topic, and just taking my opinion of Austin, like I think the Austin bench conversation is ridiculous in that he's far too good to be coming off the bench, regardless of whatever fit limitations are with him and Luka. And even so, like the Austin Luka 2-man net rating was much better than the LeBron Luka 2-man net rating. So I think, like, if anything, you got to figure out want to be careful how I frame this, but like you got to figure out the Luka LeBron. I think that's actually more of the pivot point there with the starting group, is like how those two guys can coexist better. And I think we saw progress of that in the playoffs, to be clear, but I think Austin's going to start. But for like, if the Lakers want to keep Austin, I don't see how you can sell him on a bench role. Like I think if the Lakers, if they're moving Austin to the bench, I think that is shifting things toward him potentially being elsewhere next summer. Like I think Austin is going to get, I've said this a bunch, but continue to just hear this more and more. Austin is going to get $30+ million next year, and it's going to be a starter somewhere. So whether it's with the Lakers or someone else, that is the contract he's getting, and that is the situation he's going to be in. So we can play fantasy land of what makes the most sense with this team or whatever, and I still think every scenario leads to Austin starting. But if you want to isolate Austin and set up a situation where he's probably leaving next summer, then you move him to the bench. If you want to keep him happy and empower him as the third best guy on the team and lead a situation where you retain him, and then if it doesn't work, you could flip him next 2026-27 season, then that's what happens. So I do not see a realistic scenario in which Austin comes off the bench. Golden, thoughts on getting a defensive-minded backup big? I think that's a big need for this group. I think if you look at all three centers on the rotation, like Maxi's maybe the guy who's closest to being a 50-50 player and might even be slightly better defensively at this stage of his career, just given some of his shooting and offensive regression the last couple seasons. But I would say in general, DeAndre Ayton, Jackson Hayes, and Maxi Kleber all trend more offensive than defensive. And to be clear, I'm not saying Maxi's like the best defender. I think DeAndre Ayton's the best defender of the three. But I think like if you're looking at, if we're doing like a pie chart or a slider of some kind of like each player's contributions offensively versus defensively, and the ideal player maybe is 50-50, right? It's a two-way guy. It's someone who's contributing equally on both sides of the ball. I think Ayton is at least like a 70-30 player in favor of offense. I think Jackson might even be more of like an 80-20 player in favor of offense. And then Kleber, again, I think might be the guy that's like maybe 60-40, 55-45, but he's also at a different stage of his career in his early 30s coming off a major injury. So I think they need, that's where the Kyler Kelly Exhibit 10 signing is interesting, though I don't think he's quite NBA roster level. Christian Koloko is the one guy to me within the Lakers ecosystem that if he pops, and I do think he's going to be a backup center or at least a third string center at some point in his NBA career, like full time and sooner than later, he's the one guy who I could see making a difference as a rim protector, kind of, energy big off the bench. But I think that's a real need for them. I still think they ideally need someone better than Marcus Smart and Vando defensively. That is a two-way guy and that can start and be the fifth player in the starting group and move Smart to the bench and just balance out the starting lineup. But that player is a lot harder to acquire. I think a defensive-minded backup big is something, though, that they should be looking for. And again, seems like they are looking for it with the Kyler Kelly Exhibit 10 signing. Zev asks, if you got a trade besides Wiggins, any ideal alternative? There aren't many guys that come to mind, to be honest. I think Dillon Brooks is interesting despite my hesitation with his offensive game and what I consider a lack of self-awareness with his shot selection and just his ability to I think, hijack stretches of games and call his own number far too frequently. But I do think he would be, I think like the current versions of Dillon Brooks, I think would be their closest thing to like a real two-way wing. And when he is, I think, buying into his role offensively, he can be that because he has improved as a shooter, and defensively he plays with a certain tenacity and physicality and toughness and is a multi-positional defender that I think would really help this group. So that's an interesting name for me. Does he shake loose at some point? I mentioned teams potentially underachieving and pivoting. I mentioned New Orleans, but I see Phoenix as a clear team that I do not see them as a play-in team next season. I don't really see any path for them being a play-in team. I think they'll probably be in the 11 to 12 mix, but I think the top 10, I think there's a clear teardrop from 10 to 11 in the West. And whether Phoenix is 11th or 12th, I put them there with Portland and Sacramento. Those three teams are the primary teams in that mix. Like, I just don't see any real path to them being more than, say, like high 30s in wins. So if they're a team that is underachieving and maybe they're 13th or 14th in the West, maybe they pivot around Christmas time or some time in January and Dillon Brooks is available. He's an interesting one for me. Another name on Phoenix I like is Royce O'Neal, though he's a different, like that's a tier down for sure. And I don't know if he's enough of a difference maker for you. Agbaji with Toronto is another guy, but Toronto, depending on how things shake out in the East, could be a play-in team and could be a sneaky, better than expected team. So I think that one just depends on like injuries and how they mesh. They have a lot of ISO guys. So how do those guys adapt to playing on the ball versus off the ball, et cetera. But not a lot of guys like, Matisse Thybulle is an interesting one, but I don't see a clear trade there with the Blazers. And then you just go down the list and it gets grim quickly. So, and unless they're trading Austin and making a bigger trade for a wing, I don't really see another path. I think that's why I've been saying I think Wiggins is the best potential outcome for LA. I just don't see really another guy in that price range that is clearly better, in my opinion. Miss Optimist, how serious is the Lakers front office about this season? Is the primary goal still the cap space? And thank you for the super chat. My understanding is they are serious about this season, but they are trying to balance the long-term view with the short-term view. So I don't think they're all in serious in terms of just trading every asset, and they only have one tradable first-round pick through the 2026 NBA draft. They only have one second-round pick as of right now. They do have multiple pick swaps, but they are relatively limited with their tradable assets. And unless they're putting Austin on the table, there just is not a lot out there that's going to, like, it's got to be Austin or the first, really, I think, to really, really move the needle. If they're not doing one of those two things, I think they are relatively limited in their potential trade packages. I think we'll get a better sense in December, January. I think they're also looking at this like, we want to see how good this team is. And if this team is, if it's the Christmas Day game against Houston and the Lakers are third in the West and they're rolling, like, it's going to be hard to not make another move to lean into what this group has built and how they're looking at the time. If they're 7th, 8th, 9th in the West at that point and looking more like they've faded from last season, and for whatever reason, maybe certain guys have regressed, or there's been injuries, or just the West is treacherous and they're having a tough time. Like, then all of a sudden, I think that's a different conversation, and they're probably not being as aggressive. So I really think it's going to depend on how the season goes, and that's kind of been how this front office has operated to some extent, has been dependent on like how the season is going. And like in an alternate universe, it would have been interesting to see if they don't make the Luka trade, what they end up doing in that week leading into the deadline with that group, because that group was starting to come together in a special way. And that was the beginning of that stretch where they had the league's best defense for 24 games. And they were starting to figure out their small ball identity and their defensive identity. So the plan is still future flexibility, but I think they're trying to balance that with winning now. And I think they think they could do both. I'm a little bit more skeptical of, I think they're probably currently leaning more toward the future and better position in the longer term than the shorter term, but we'll see. Again, this is a team that just won 50 games, was the 3 seed, did have a very disappointing finish to the season, but I think it's partly going to be determined by how they start through the first 2 to 3 months of the season. Ryan Rich, do you think more money will be spent this year on resources with the new ownership? Yeah, I do. I think we already saw this with the hire with the new strength and conditioning coach, and also bringing in someone with ties to Luka and someone with Dallas ties. But I talked about this, I forgot if it was a mailbag or a live, but my understanding is I think they're going to slow roll some of these things as the ownership change is not even finalized yet. It has not fully transferred over. It has not been finalized and approved yet and gone through all the crossing the T's and dotting all the I's and stuff. So once that happens, and that's projected to happen before the end of the calendar year, then I think we'll start to see a little bit more. But I really think next offseason is going to be the big offseason in terms of evaluating how things operate and where some of the blind spots are, where are some of the areas that they can improve. And then once they have a year sample size under the new regime, new ownership, they'll start to make some more changes. But I think we've already seen them with the way that they attack the draft and spending money to trade up multiple times. And then also with the new strength and conditioning coach. And, we'll see if they make any other hires before the start of the season. We're still a couple months away. I think they are showing some signs of being more aggressive and operating in a certain way. But and I think you got to look at the Luka situation too. They rolled out the red carpet. They've been out now to Poland to watch him play at Eurobasket. And obviously they gave him the big contract extension. So I think we've seen slight minor changes so far, but I do expect over the next calendar year, at this point, next year, if we're talking August 29, 2026, I suspect we'll be talking about more substantial changes to the franchise in both infrastructure and just resources and all that stuff. Rich, is this? I'm not going to butcher your last name. I'll just say Rich, but I do recognize the profile picture. Thank you for the super chat. Chances on LeBron asking / not asking for a trade. You're really putting me on the hot seat here with this one. I'm going to go with, I'd still say like 85-15. I think when it first happened, I'm trying to, I think my percentages have progressively gone up, but they've been, I want to say I said like 95-5, I think. And I don't remember if I said it on here or I did a different show or radio hit. I said like 95% chance he's staying, doesn't ask out, or 5% chance he asks out. Then I think at some point over the past month, I moved it to like 90-10. I'm at like 85-15, which is still decisively in favor of, heavy favorite is him staying a Laker, and I think that's the overwhelmingly likely outcome here. But I think that there's a lot of factors that go into this. Like, is this? I think one thing that could shift this potentially to a more 75-25 or something like that is this LeBron's last season, and then with that, like, how important is it getting the swan song in LA and finishing his legacy as a Laker, or competing for a championship? Because if, like, I think really two things would have to happen, in my opinion, for him to, for this to drastically change, would be he announces he's retiring after this year. This is his final year. And then the Lakers are not, for whatever reason, are underperforming around the deadline. So maybe it's mid to late January and the Lakers are 7th in the West, 8th in the West, whatever. They're looking like a solid but relatively mediocre team, and LeBron wants to compete for a title, and at that point he asks out and he has his list of whatever that list ends up being. So I think those two things would have to happen, but we don't have clarity as of right now if LeBron is retiring, if he's playing potentially another couple years, 3 years, whatever. And then we obviously don't know where the Lakers are going to be at come, say, January, mid to late January. So I think there's a couple dominoes that would have to fall, in my opinion, for this to really swing and pick up some momentum of LeBron asking out. But as of right now, I expect him to be a Laker on media day, the opening of training camp, preseason, and for the entire season. I just think there is a slight chance that, I think the door's cracked open slightly, however small. But I expect him to be like, if you're asking me April 15th, where's LeBron James? I expect him to be in a Lakers uniform. Jazz Singh, what do you think of Nesmith for Rui and a first? I would do that, and I like that. I think Nesmith is someone who would check pretty much all the boxes of what the Lakers need from that starting perimeter 3-and-D type role guy. And if you think about a lineup of Luka, Austin, Nesmith, LeBron, and Ayton, I really like that 5-man grouping. Nesmith is someone who we've seen him swing playoff games with his shooting and just go supernova and catch fire and just rip the net. And then we've also seen him take on the primary defensive assignments and do a really good job. I thought he was instrumental in the New York series defending Jalen Brunson. I do think Shea gave him some trouble, but Shea was the MVP, finals MVP last year. He's a top 2 or 3 player in the world. Like, that's Jokic is going to give the best big men problems. Shea's going to give the best players problems. Luka's going to give the best players problems. Giannis is going to give the best players problems. So I don't really hold that against Nesmith, but I think we did see some of his limitations in the finals against OKC, where I did think Shea largely had his way in that series. And I actually think Nembhard defended Shea better than Nesmith did. And Nesmith, I think, was better against J-Dub, but J-Dub also had a monster series as well. So point being, like, there are some limitations, I think, to Nesmith. I don't think he's in like I don't think he's like an all defense caliber guy. I think he's probably like if we're tiering it, he's probably like a tier 2A defender, maybe a tier 1B, but he's kind of on that borderline. So he's not in like the ultra elite, but I do think, especially factoring in his shooting, his offensive capabilities, and we've already seen proof of concept of him being a starter and a heavy minutes guy and a closer on a finals team. And he was always guarding the best player and hitting big shots and making big plays and just having a bunch of big games. Like, that to me is worth it. And I think that the key here with like, I think peak Rui can get close to Neesmith when Rui's like right. It's just Neesmith is a much better perimeter defender and can guard down in a way that Rui just like, I think the gap between them, I think Neesmith is better offensively too, but just the gap between them defensively is big enough for me that I would give up a first. And Neesmith's also young enough where he could grow with Luka and potentially Austin, depending on what happens with him. Kevin, thank you for the super chat. Looking at how much the Cavs are above the second apron and Allen's salary goes up a lot next year, is there a chance that Hunter becomes available midseason? This is a good question, and I think there is a chance. I think if you're Cleveland, you have to think, though, like, this is a team that has been close. They have had, especially last year, they won 64 games, I want to say. We're 64-18, and we're looking like the heavy favorites, or at least the slight favorites, because Boston at the time, we didn't know things were going to go haywire the way that they did. But they were right there with Boston going into the playoffs in terms of teams we were expecting to be in the conference finals and potentially represent the Eastern Conference in the championship. So I think with Hunter, there's a lot of factors here of like, how good is Cleveland? Is he relatively dispensable for them? And if they're just rolling and he's like not performing that well, he could be an interesting buy low candidate where they just look at it like, we don't necessarily need him and we would like to shed some money and we're good enough where we can afford to. But if they're not performing as well or he is really an indispensable part of their rotation, and I kind of view that as the more likely outcome, at least the latter part, then I don't know if he becomes available. But certainly, like if they get to a point where they have to shed salary, he is an obvious guy, especially in comparison with like a Garland or an Allen, who are just better and more important to what they do. But they did give up a lot to get him, or relatively a lot. And they have lost some depth in some ways. So I do think he's a pretty important part of what they do. But I also don't think he was that impressive in the playoffs for them. So I could see him being someone who they view as relatively expendable. But you also have to factor in, like, if they're so far ahead of the rest of the East, ownership might be looking at that like it is worth going into the second apron and just like when you have a chance to win a title. Like, the worst thing would be if Cleveland gets out to an amazing start, right, and they're far ahead of the rest of the East, and then they trade him, and then maybe they get an injury, and then all of a sudden the wheels start to come off, and then they lose in like the second round again, and it's like, we really could have used DeAndre Hunter, but we were cheap and traded him out, traded him because of the second apron, and then we didn't have the depth and the insurance to withstand certain injuries to our rotation. So I lean more no than yes, but I do see a path to him potentially becoming available. And again, if they have to get off some salary, he's the guy who makes the most sense. Xavier, thank you for the super chat. Which max player should be Luka's co-star going forward? I think if you gave me a magic wand, Giannis is the guy, right? And that's not necessarily a controversial opinion. He's a top, at worst, 4 player in the league. He's the 3rd or 4th best guy in the league, I think. And there's just a natural pick and roll chemistry there with those two. Like, you saw how great Luka made Jackson Hayes look as a roller. Now imagine Giannis Antetokounmpo as a roller, and Giannis's ability to play in transition and those two playing off of each other. You could have the Luka to LeBron full court outlet passes to now Luka to Giannis. And I think Giannis would also cover for Luka a lot defensively. I think that's an important thing that really like would have been interesting to see Luka and AD together. Like I think the ideal second star for Luka is either a guard, which we've seen with Jalen Brunson ascending, and then Kyrie, or it's a big. And if it's a big though, ideally that player is elite defensively. So I think like a Giannis or a Wemby would both be great. I think Giannis is far more likely than Wemby just because of the infrastructure in San Antonio versus the infrastructure in Milwaukee. Jokic would be awesome. I just think I think he's staying in Denver. I also think there's some defensive limitations there where I just talked about ideally that big man is elite defensively, and that's obviously one of Jokic's weaknesses or just not really a strong point for him. And then thinking about it, like Ant would be interesting, but I think there's a little bit of a clash there with the ball. Tatum is interesting, especially depends what he looks like coming off of his Achilles situation. Those are some of the guys, I guess. Like I think I'm thinking big here, right? Like we could be like a Jaylen Brown is a good fit. He doesn't rise to me. He's no longer a top 15 guy, and so I'm thinking like top 15 guys who would really fit. I think anyone that's really not like I think this version of Brunson and maybe like a Mitchell, those guys are maybe like the exceptions, but anyone really in that top 15, I think is a great fit with Luka. But ideally someone who could defend and play off ball to some extent. That's where like a Tatum or an Ant Edwards is also interesting. Cole says Cooper flag. Hey, yeah, you never know. Lakers could pry another Maverick at some point in the future. Mom in the chat says, hey everyone, on this Labor Day weekend, good to see you here. Please remember to hit the like button. It's free and a fun way to support Jovan's channel. Thank you. Yeah, and let's get those, trying to hit 30K before the season starts. So we're a little bit under 500 subscribers away. So if you're watching, you have not subscribed yet, please consider doing so. I think about 40% of the audience that watches consistently is not subscribed. So let's get those numbers up. Beyond the game, should the Lakers trade and get space to sign Maxi Prosper, and is it worth it? I don't think it's worth it. I think to have a team waive a young guy this early in their, like, it just gives me JHS vibes. It alarms some, like, I think teams, only thing I've learned covering the NBA, and like there's just different things you learn about how front offices operate in just universal things across teams. And one of the big things with front offices is they hate admitting mistakes on first round picks. That's why you'll see them keep a guy, like once they invest in a guy, they will refuse to view it as a sunk cost and try to double down and maybe even sign him to a second contract and like find a way to make it work to save face. And then also certain guys get certain reputations. That's why a guy that kind of comes to mind and no shade at him was like a Wes Johnson, who was a number 4 pick. And he was someone who bounced around and like he had some solid moments, but I think there were times where he was on certain teams where there was maybe guys better than him or who were maybe more deserving, but because he had this pedigree as like a former lottery pick, they try to make it work with those types of guys. And Prosper, could be worth like a two-way, could be worth a look in South Bay, but I don't think right now he's an NBA roster player, but could be wrong. But I think if they're trying to create space, it should be for like a Malik Beasley. That's the guy I would go after. Kevin asks, would you do Rui, DK in a first for Hunter if he became available mid-season? And would the Cavs agree? And will the Cavs agree if they want to move Hunter to get off salary? I think that's an overpay, to be completely honest. I think even Rui for Hunter to like, I guess you could talk me into Hunter being better than Rui. I think they're pretty close, to be completely honest. And I didn't always think that. Like if you go back to last year, before Hunter was traded to the Cavs, Hunter was one of the guys I wanted the Lakers to seek out. And I think even at the time I was down for Rui and a first or something along those lines for Hunter. My opinion has shifted. I think I've dropped my confidence or belief in Hunter, and my confidence and belief in Rui has risen. I think Hunter's a better perimeter defender, but I do still think that there's some limitation there where he's still probably more of like a 3.5 to 4 defensively, and he can guard threes probably better than Rui can, but it's not a strength of his. So I would like either a guy a little bit smaller and quicker, or someone who is better at guarding down. That I don't think Hunter is quite that guy. So I would consider Rui plus a second, maybe at the most Rui plus Dalton. I would not give up a first for Hunter. And then you have to flip it like, does Cleveland want to do that? I think it just depends. Again, I just talked about Cleveland and their motivation, but I think it would depend on where they're at and if they really need to shed money or not. But I also think as a contending team and probably the best team in the East, it doesn't really make sense to sell off your like 6th or 7th best player. Jazz, thank you for the Jazz Sing. Thank you for the super chat. Pacers could get cheap again and trade one of their wings. Plus, what do you think of Champagny from Washington? Could he be a sneaky get as a backup 3-and-D wing? On the Pacers front, I think they got to be careful because the fan base was, I think they're mainly upset with Miles Turner, but I think the Pacers mishandled the Turner situation, and now I get some of the reasons why they were okay with getting off of Miles Turner, but they're in a tough spot now where it's not, I think they viewed next year as a gap year, and let's just, no Halliburton. Let's see if we can continue to develop Nembhard and Neesmith and Mathurin and some of our young core, and then go into 26, 27 with Halliburton back. Some of these guys have expanded their skill sets, have spread their wings a little bit. They could do a little bit more. We're not as dependent on Halliburton. And then let's just go back into 2026, 27 as a contender in the East. I don't know if it's going to be that simple for them. And I think they would be open to potentially trading some guys, but I don't think they're going to sell low on them. And I think that's the distinction here is like, I think if you're talking Mathurin or Neesmith or Nembhard, I think the starting point is Rui and a first, and it potentially goes up higher, especially depending on which one of those 3 guys we're talking about. I think it would be Nembhard, Neesmith, Mathurin in terms of trade value in that order, but like I think we're talking Rui and a first, and that's the starting point. That's a steep starting point, and the Lakers would have to think about that, and obviously Indiana might not even consider that. So, but certainly a possibility that they could cheap out. That has been their track record. I just think they got to be careful that they don't strip down. Like they just made the finals. They were in Game 7. They already lost Turner. Halliburton's out for the year. If you trade another one of these guys, you're just in a tricky spot going into the following season. And I like Champagny. His last name always gives me trouble. I think it's another one it's kind of similar to like a Josh Green in Charlotte, like a Royce O'Neal, like these types of guys. I view them more as like their upside to me is like 8th man on a team, and that might even be overselling it, but it could be worth a gamble depending on the price. And I don't know his contract off the top of my head, so I'm going to quickly look it up. 6'6", 24 years old, for what it's worth. Talking about Justin Champagny, 4-year, $12 million deal. He's still on his rookie deal. And he's got a club option. No, wait, this is Julian. 1 second. 4-year, $9.8 million. So still 2nd year of his rookie deal. 2 more years, club option, 2027, 28. So, I mean, could you flip? It's just hard to see who they. I mean, you probably have to give up Dalton, to be completely honest, and I don't know if that would make sense. So I don't see an obvious way to get him. In defense of the genre, will new ownership have an impact on how reporters cover the Lakers? I don't think so, but you never know. Some ownership groups are more media friendly. Some are less media friendly. I think I look at how Golden State operates, and they've been a very media friendly. They're the most media friendly organization in the NBA and in sports, period. They might be the most media friendly. So that and I think that's the, I think that's the right approach. And I've tried to make this point before. Like, we are, we can, like, I would say media can, it's a low bar to make us happy and to scratch our back. And if you give us access, and of course, anytime, I'm sure that there are always boundaries with the access, and especially teams that are more media friendly, you got to think they're probably all on the same page with what they're sharing, and there's always an agenda, and that's just how these things work, right? But teams that are more media friendly, like I've gotten, I think I've shared this story before, maybe not, but like back in 2019, I was covering the Clippers Warriors series, and I wanted Steve Kerr for a story I was writing on Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And I went to Warriors practice, and this is a practice in the playoffs, mind you. And I've never met Steve Kerr at this point. Like, I've asked him questions in press conferences, but never actually met Steve Kerr. I get Steve Kerr for 7 minutes after he already spoke at practice. And he did 2 other one-on-ones before me, both with national. I think it was like Mark Spears and someone else. I don't remember the other person. But he does his practice availability. He does 2 one-on-ones. Then I'm some random reporter who covers the Clippers, the opposition, and he gives me 7 minutes during the playoffs. And I'll just say this, like, no coach, I covered Doc, I covered Ty Lue, I covered Frank Vogel, Darvin Ham, JJ. I've never seen a coach do that. And that is like the culture that Golden State has created over there. And I think that it garners goodwill with the media. Like, all we want is access. All we want is quotes and to be able to ask questions and to be able to interact with these people. And I think they get so nervous about certain things getting out, or people misspeaking, or just putting up these restrictions and boundaries, that it actually ends up hurting them more than helping them. So if anything, I hope things change where the Lakers are a little bit more access friendly than they have been in the past. But I have not gotten a sense of whether or not they will be. And there's certainly, I think the Lakers are probably more somewhere in the middle of the pack. Like, they're not, there's certainly a lot of organizations that are more closed off than them, to be clear, at least with, how the media stuff operates. But yeah, I mean, I'm interested to see how that changes, because it could stay the same, or it could get much better or much worse, and you don't really know until the sale goes through. IDNM, trade Ayton for Kessler, Rui and a first for Nesmith, Dalton for Highsmith. Okay, let's go through each one. The Jazz would not do Ayton for Kessler. I think Kessler is straight up better than DeAndre Ayton and is a better fit for both Utah and LA than DeAndre Ayton. Like, he's one of the best rim protectors, if not, like, he's right there as a rim protector with, I think, Wemby's number 1, and then it's like Kessler and Chet Holmgren are in that conversation for 2-3. And I guess Rudy Gobert, when he's able to set his feet, is up there as well. But I don't see, like, it would have to be Ayton in a first to even, and I don't even see Utah doing that. Rui first for Nesmith, talked about that earlier. I'm into that. I think that would be good for the Lakers. And then Dalton for Highsmith. I was really surprised with the Highsmith price, and especially with him apparently being a guy that Miami was hesitant to put in. I don't know how much of the Miami stuff was true with who they were willing to put in for KD or whatnot, but I think Highsmith would help the Lakers more this season. I think longer term, I'm still higher on Dalton's like long-term upside. But obviously, if you're trying to maximize this season, I think Highsmith is a better current player and certainly a better two-way player. Kevin, AR and a first for Kamara and Thibault. This is an interesting one. It depends how high you are on Kamara. I think the Lakers, I've said this before, I don't want to say it's like all-star or bust for Austin, but I do think their threshold for trading Austin. And anytime I share this, like, I feel like I'm just telling you what I've heard. So you could believe it or not believe it, but don't shoot the messenger here, because I'm not saying whether I agree or not. I'm just sharing that I continue to hear like the the bar to trade Austin, I think it has to be an all-star level guy or like a name. I think for those in the know, Kamara is a really good player, and I'm really high on him. I've also heard that, I've shared this before, Portland has a really high asking price for Kamara. I think first in Austin is interesting. The one other thing, though, with this is if you're thinking about Portland's current build, they already have Scoot and Shaden Sharp. Adding Austin to the mix doesn't really make sense. You want a Kamara around those guys and not, like, for the same reason you'd want a Kamara around a Luka, you want them around, obviously, different players, different tiers, but like projecting out for Portland, you want a Kamara next to a Scoot, next to a Shaden Sharp. So, and then they're going to now have Dame and Drew Holiday, but those are, I think, more shorter term situations. So if I'm Portland, I'm just keeping Kamara. I think he's that special of a 3-and-D guy who is going to be an all defense guy for the next 5 to 7 years at least. Dr. One, just so you guys know, I'm going about 15 more minutes. I have a fantasy draft in an hour and 12 minutes, so I got to go lock in and prepare for that. But I will be back next week with plenty of content and probably go live a couple times. But Doctor asked, do you think Bron gets traded before the deadline? If he stays the whole year, I think he leaves in the offseason if they go out in the first round. I talked about this earlier, so I'll keep this brief. I said about 85% he stays, 15% he leaves. I think it partly depends on if he's retiring or not and how the Lakers are doing in, say, like January. And I think I'm with you. I would lean, if he stays through the season and he's continuing to play, I would probably put it at 55%. He's on another team, 45%. He's still a Laker. Beyond the game, would you give up DK and a first for Ayo Dosunmu? I would. I don't think the Lakers would, but I would. I really like Ayo. And I think he's also, in a way, sort of Austin insurance if you end up trading Austin or he ends up leaving at some point. I don't think he's as good as Austin. I don't think he's as close to being as good as Austin. But like if you look at the rest of what the Lakers have in terms of ball handling and playmaking, I do think he's a clear upgrade over Gabe. And I even think he's an upgrade over this version of Marcus Smart in terms of the playmaking, ball handling. So I think from a talent perspective, like he's, to me, probably more of like a 6th or 7th guy on a really good team. Like not the same type of player, but I could see him being like a Kason Wallace, like that, more so where he's slotted in a team's rotation, like 7th guy, can close in certain matchups. But again, I'm not comparing them as players or as defenders. I'm just more so saying like their general role within a team's infrastructure. I think he could be that type of guy. Like I think he can be what the Lakers needed Gabe to be. Again, not exactly the same role, but more so in terms of impact. Like I'm really high on him. But I get that is a lot to give up, and I don't think the Lakers would do that, but I would. Ryan Rich asked, what do you think happens with the Kuminga situation? It seems unsalvageable, and it seems like there's just no way he could come back. So I think Kuminga is going to get traded, but to where and for what, I don't know. I think this ultimately ends with Golden State having to sell lower than they wanted to. I think at some point they have to admit it's a sunk cost. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier and I think Kuminga is an interesting one because I think it's more so been a mismanagement rather than him like underperforming or underachieving. I think he has underperformed and underachieved, but I also don't think he's been set up for success in Golden State. And I think they've undermined some of his abilities. But another situation where a team doesn't really want to admit it's a sunk cost, and I get it, right? You don't want to sell low on him, especially when you could have, I mean, he was probably worth a couple of first round picks year and a half ago, no longer worth that. So they're kind of in a tough spot where they're probably going to have to sell low on him. It's just, how low do you sell and what does that ultimately look like? So I'm not sure, but I do think he ends up getting traded at some point before. I just don't see a way that he stays in Golden State. It feels like that that bridge is more, it's scorched. It's not even burned. It's not burning. It's scorched. Is this Eeg? Because I recognize the E. I think this might be Eeg. If so, what up? But your handle's the town 1990. Hi, Jovan. Something not adding up to me, re LBJ. He can't be happy with this roster and how the last few years ended. My gut tells me there will be some sort of impasse between the front office and clutch re a buyout. Am I insane? Sure, the incentives for LAL don't align. Seems like all these superstars eventually get their way. Genie lets him go, thanks him for his service. He signs in Cleveland for cheap and has final hurrah. It just adds up to me. Am I nuts? I don't think you're nuts. I think the one thing with this is a couple things with this. Someone has to budge in a buyout, because if we're just the way that you're framing this, and you could correct me if I'm wrong in the chat, but the way I'm understanding this is I think you're implying that he gives back a little bit of money to the Lakers. The Lakers do him the favor of opting out or buying out. And then he goes to Cleveland, let's say for the minimum, and whatever that prorated amount at that time is for the minimum, he gets that difference with Cleveland. The issue on the Lakers side is if you buy out LeBron, and even if you get back 2-3 million, whatever that number ends up being, you now have $50 million sitting on your cap and no one or no means to replace that. And you could stretch that. But now that's affecting you for multiple years. That doesn't really make sense. It doesn't align with what they're trying to do with the 2026 or 2027 plan. So you probably have to take the L and just eat that money. And that, to me, if you just take LeBron off this team and, okay, let's just say hypothetically they cut 2 to 3 million. So now you have that extra wiggle room. Like he's off the roster. So now you have 13 guys under contract. You do have some extra wiggle room to sign a player. Even if you sign a Malik Beasley, who right now is probably the best realistic minimum option out there. If you just you look at the current roster, you take LeBron off and you put Malik Beasley on, this is a play-in team. And like, we're talking, I think at best the 7 seed, and we're probably talking somewhere in that, like, I think like 7 to 9 is probably where this group is. So that is I think if you buy out LeBron, you are effectively punting on the season and you don't have a real shot to make. Maybe you can win around if Luka is just that special and that dominant and the matchup breaks right, but you are not a true, in my opinion, conference finals contender or finals contender if you lose LeBron. So that, in addition to just like having that money just sitting there, and you're paying to make your team a lot worse. Now, the flip side is you could do a buyout where LeBron gives up all this money or some amount of money that the Lakers are more comfortable with, and then he goes and signs. But now LeBron's giving up a lot of money, and he just had the option to give up a lot of money because teams didn't have cap space, and he chose not to. So I just don't think you're nuts. I think what you're saying makes sense in theory in terms of the Lakers just appeasing LeBron, letting him get out, go find your team, go back to Cleveland, go wherever. The issue is I just do not see a number for both sides that makes sense. Like the number for even if the Lakers could get the buyout number to a low enough point where they're like comfortable with it, if you just lose LeBron and replace him with a minimum guy, your team is so much worse. Like the vision of this team being a top 3 or 4 seed in the West, winning a round, winning 2 rounds, winning 3 rounds, winning it all, is like Luka's MVP level and LeBron is all NBA second or third team level. You take away the second or third team level guy, it doesn't matter how great Luka is. Like even with Luka's dominance in the playoffs, you go back and Jalen Brunson was awesome during that conference finals run. Kyrie was awesome during that finals run. You take away that caliber of player, and I would say LeBron's even better than either one of those guys was during those runs. Like I don't think it works. So I don't want to, you're not nuts. I don't see a buyout scenario that makes sense for both sides. There's a buyout scenario that makes sense for LeBron where keep all your money and go wherever you want. And then I don't even really see a buyout scenario that makes sense for the Lakers. So yeah, it's tough to figure out. But thank you for. I wouldn't say it's 100% certainty they will not buy him out, but I would say 90+%. My mom asks, looking forward into the next season, which team do you feel is the best roster? What teams do you think will be contenders? I think the best roster is OKC. I would make them a heavy favorite to repeat, assuming health. My inner circle of contenders is OKC, Denver, Houston, Cleveland, and New York. I think those are the 5 best teams in the league. And I do give Cleveland and New York a boost for being in the East. And then I would have the Lakers in the second tier with teams like Minnesota, Orlando, the Clippers. That's probably my second tier is those 4. And I probably have Lakers second, Minnesota, then LA. But yeah. Sky Falcon, how do you buy out LeBron and sell Luka on a lost season for no reason? Exactly. That's why I just don't see that happening. Gary A, they're no damn finals contender with or without LeBron. Same. I would say I think there's a slim chance that they're a finals contender with LeBron. I think there's no chance they're a finals contender without LeBron. And I get what you are saying. I just disagree with I think there's a big gap between them. Like, even if you say they're not a finals, let's just say they're not a finals contender with LeBron, I think they could, we just saw 50 wins, 3 seed. I think they could easily be top 3 or 4 seed and win a round or 2. Without LeBron, I think you cut off that ceiling of, I don't think they sniff 50 wins. I think they probably lose in round 1, if not, like, just imagine no LeBron in the Minnesota series. That's a sweep. Like that's a sweep. So, and like probably a decisive sweep, like 15, 20 plus points a night. Like I disagree. David, what about Dallas? I assume you're talking about contenders or where I have them in my tiers. So I did my West tiers, my West tiers quickly. I have tier 1 is OKC and Denver. I have tier 2, and this is in order: OKC, Denver. Tier 2 is Houston, Minnesota, Lakers, Clippers, Warriors. So 5-team tier 2. Tier 3, I believe I had Dallas, Memphis, San Antonio as my tier 3. And then tier 4 was like Phoenix, Sacramento, Portland. And then tier 5 was New Orleans, Utah. Dallas, I have. So if we're talking, if Kyrie can come back, I think Dallas is a dark horse late in the season. I just don't think, I think without him, there are some real offensive, their 2 best shot creators are going to be Anthony Davis and Cooper Flagg. And I think there are some real playmaking and ball handling limitations with that. You're going to have to rely a lot on D'Lo, which could be a good or bad thing depending on which D'Lo shows up. But I just, looking at their offense, I have some real concerns with the decision-making, the ball handling, all that stuff. In defense of the genre, says burgers to celebrate the holiday weekend. You know it. I got 4 burgers lined up, so I'm going to have to get into that. All right, I'm going to wrap here because I have to lock in for my fantasy draft, but I will be back potentially on Sunday. I might go live on Sunday. If not, I'll be back on Tuesday for sure. I have a breakdown that I'm excited about, talking through one of the big questions of the offseason and the season that I'm going to be breaking down in depth. But I appreciate you. Hope you all have a great Friday. Hope you all have a great weekend, a great Labor Day weekend. Hope you get to take some time off, enjoy some time with family and friends, enjoy a couple of beverages or whatever is your vice of choice. Stay safe, and I will talk to you all next week.